Thursday, September 20, Paul before the leaders. Although Paul was speaking to Agrippa, Festus was the first to react, as seen in Acts 26:24. At this point, Festus interrupted Paul's defence. "You are out of your mind, Paul," he shouted. "Your great learning is driving you insane." Festus would have had no problem if Paul had spoken about the immortality of the soul, but even the ancient Greco-Roman knew that both concepts, immortality and resurrection, do not go along well with one another. Thus they kept the former and rejected the latter. This is why Paul says elsewhere that the gospel was foolish to the Gentiles. 1 Corinthians 1 verse 23, "But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles." In a respectful manner, Paul defended the sanity of his ideas and turned to Agrippa, a Jew who could not only understand him, but also who could confirm that what he was saying was in agreement with the Hebrew prophets. As we read in Acts 26:25 and 26, "I am not insane, most excellent Festus," Paul replied. "What I am saying is true and reasonable. The king is familiar with these things, and I can speak freely to him. I am convinced that none of this has escaped his notice, because it was not done in a corner." Question. Read Acts 26, verses 27 to 28. What was Agrippa's response to Paul's pressing question? Acts 26, verse 27. "King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know you do." Then Agrippa said to Paul, "Do you think that in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian?" Paul's answer put Agrippa in a difficult position. As a Jew, he would never deny his belief in the Scriptures. On the other hand, if he gave an affirmative answer, there would be no option but for him to accept Jesus as the Messiah. His reply was a clever escape from the logical trap he was in. "Are you so quickly persuading me to become a Christian?" This is a better translation of the Greek than the traditional, "You almost persuade me to become a Christian." Paul's rejoinder reveals an impressive level of commitment to the gospel. "Whether quickly or not, I pray to God that not only you, but also all who are listening to me today might become such as I am, except for these chains." That was Acts 26, verse 29. In these last words in that hearing, the apostle did not plead to be free, as were those listening to him. Instead, he wished they could be like him, except for the chains that bound him. Paul's missionary zeal greatly surpassed his care for his own safety. Question. Read Acts chapter 26, verses 30 to 32. How did Agrippa express his conviction of Paul's innocence? "The king arose, and with him the governor and Bernice and those sitting with them. After they left the room, they began saying to one another, 'This man is not doing anything that deserves death or imprisonment.' Agrippa said to Festus, 'This man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar.'" Festus needed Agrippa's help only to fill in the report. We read about that in Acts 25. Paul's appeal to Caesar had already been formally granted. We also read that in Acts 25. The prisoner was no longer under the governor's jurisdiction. And so to finish today, read Acts 26, verses 24 to 28. What did Paul ultimately appeal to, and what should this tell us about what our final authority in matters of faith should always be? At this point, Festus interrupted Paul's defence. "You are out of your mind, Paul," he shouted. "Your great learning is driving you insane." "I am not insane, most excellent Festus," Paul replied. "What I am saying is true and reasonable. The king is familiar with these things, and I can speak freely to him. I am convinced that none of this has escaped his notice, because it was not done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know you do." Then Agrippa said to Paul, "Do you think that in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian?"